calls for an inquiry into the case of 5 members of An Garda Síochána, including some with strong Clare connections. Now, speaking just a couple of months ago, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin admitted in the Dáil that the case had a severe negative impact on the careers of those involved and on morale within the force overall. The officers included retired Superintendent Eamonn O'Neill, Sergeant Anne-Marie Hassett, Garda Colm Cleary, Garda Tom McGlinchey and Sergeant Michelle Leahy, who were all cleared of perverting the course of justice at Limerick Circuit Criminal Court following an 8-week trial. And this involved a case into the alleged cancellation of road traffic tickets. Questions are now being raised about the handling of the case by the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the estimated cost of the trial, and whether a formal review or inquiry should take place. At a meeting of an Oireachtas committee last week, Tipperary North Labour TD Deputy Alan Kelly, who's also Labour's spokesperson for justice, raised the matter with Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan, asking if he had a concern about the legal costs that are coming down the road in relation to An Garda Síochána settling cases and the many more similar cases that are to come, saying there seems to be an avalanche of them. The Minister responded that he doesn't. Deputy Kelly also asked Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan if he would order an inquiry into what happened. And here is just a little bit of that exchange.
Just hear me out on this. And the DPP made a decision to prosecute, and the 5 people were acquitted, found not guilty. It is the case, and you may think this is unfair, but a considerable number of people are prosecuted for offences of which they're subsequently acquitted. It can have devastating consequences on their lives. But I'm not aware, Deputy, of many cases where somebody gets an entitlement to damages because they were prosecuted and they're subsequently acquitted. Now, I know, but in terms of the damages claims, the fact that people were acquitted doesn't mean that there has to be an inquiry.
OK, but let me just say this to you. That's your opinion. You're going to have damn well stand over that. Because this isn't over. There's more layers to this. And I'm telling you, this is going to have to be looked at some stage. You're responsible for An Garda Síochána, and I understand what you're saying as regards the line, and I understand the line. I'm asking you to consider this. I believe you will have to consider this, right? And if you want to maintain morale, and if you want to maintain standards, I'm telling you, it stinks. It stinks. What happened here stinks. It should never have happened. And why it happened in the Midwest and Limerick really needs to be looked into.
Now, that's just some of the exchange at last week's Oireachtas committee between Labour TD Alan Kelly and Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan. I'm delighted to say that on the line joining me now are the Labour Tipperary TD Alan Kelly and Clare Fianna Fáil TD Cathal Crowe. You're both very welcome to the programme this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us on.
Cathal, we've heard what Alan Kelly, some of Alan Kelly's exchange with Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan at the Oireachtas committee last week. I'd actually be very interested to get your own take first. Do you agree with or defend what your party colleague, the Justice Minister, had to say there? Because you've previously called for the Garda Commissioner to issue a formal apology to the Gardaí involved here. The Justice Minister doesn't believe that just because they were found not guilty in this case that they should be entitled to compensation, when we know that this had a gruelling impact on their lives for 7 years and it was a completely unfounded mess.
Yeah, good morning. Look, thanks for having me on. I suppose, first of all, I want to say about Jim O'Callaghan. I think he's been an outstanding Minister for Justice. He's really hit the ground running. And across many metrics, he's performing well. And I think he's going down well with the rank and file members in Garda Síochána. So he has inherited a few messes. I think this was one of them. And yes, this was tied up in the courts process. I think what's really shameful here is that this took over 9 years to bring about justice. I've made the point in the Dáil that you'd probably be trialled, possibly acquitted or convicted for murder and back out of prison again by this time. There have been cases of people, certainly manslaughter cases, where they've been in and out of the prison service and back out again. But these were rank and file guards hauled through the absolute mill on this. And at one stage, there were 108 guards entirely in the country suspended. At that was nearly 2/3 of what the Clare Garda division could have within its ranks at the time. So this was a huge, I think in some cases maybe warranted in the minority cases, but in many cases there was a witch hunt, I think, going on. I became aware of this years ago, and I used Dáil privilege to highlight this case many times over. I think it was excessive. I think what was warranted here might have been some internal matter, like would happen in many workplaces, but it certainly didn't need show trials. It didn't need hauling everyone into the docks, ruining careers. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, because in that Limerick Guards division, which takes in the huge swathe of County Clare, you had many other junior guards have personal items like laptops and mobile devices confiscated. They were cast under initial suspicion. It has ruined some of their careers. It has stagnated their prospects of progressing and advancing in the career. So I think the former Garda Commissioner prevailed over a lot of this. It was during his tenure, but I think the current Garda Commissioner should be issuing an apology on behalf of the force to these men and women.
Deputy Kelly, we know that two of the accused involved in this case, that's former Superintendent Eamonn O'Neill and Sergeant Anne-Marie Hassett, they've commenced illegal action against the state arising from the original arrest of Eamonn O'Neill some years ago and other matters related to the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation's investigation here. That's what you're calling for an inquiry into here. Do you accept anything that the Justice Minister said to you? I know we heard you disagreeing in the short term there, but as you said, an avalanche of more cases to come.
Yeah, I've been raising this issue for years because what was happening inside in the Midwest, and I'm only out the road from Limerick, a number of the people affected here, a number of the Gardaí affected here are my constituents because of the proximity. But the real issue for me is, why was Limerick picked? Why was this division picked? Why was there such a focus there? Why did it take so long? And we have to really dig into the motivations as to why these individuals were picked, starting with Eamonn O'Neill. And as he says himself, you know, the rest of them followed as a result of his arrest. And there needs to be some form of inquiry / review / whatever, so that we don't end up in a scenario like this again. Because this isn't over, Dara. There are other trials coming down. There were other guards that were suspended that are now not suspended. There is obviously these 5 individuals. There's a network of issues here that goes even beyond the trial of those 5 Gardaí. This has cost the state tens of millions, I would argue, because we've got to factor in the amount of lost time as regards Garda resources, specialist unit resources, the amount of time, the issues in relation to legal fees, and a range of other as well. And I've no doubt that there will be an avalanche of legal cases coming down the road as well, and justifiably so. So we really need to look at what happened in the Dáil. In fairness to Deputy Crowe, he asked his own Taoiseach. His own Taoiseach said that there should be some look back at this. But you have to question now who holds rank. Is the Taoiseach or the Minister for Justice? Because the Minister for Justice is flatly refusing anything. I mean, I'm not talking about a tribunal or anything like that at this stage. But what he does need to do is use the powers that he has to appoint somebody to look at what happened here over the duration of this time. Because really, it's going to have to happen at some stage, I believe, whether it's, under Jim O'Callaghan or somebody else, because somebody's going to look and say, hold on a second, because of the decisions made by senior people in An Garda Síochána, it's going to cost the taxpayer a huge amount, tens and tens of millions of euros potentially, and we need to find out what happened here. It is outrageous what happened here. I have met many of these guards. They've cried before me. I mean, their lives were destroyed, absolutely destroyed. It's heartbreaking. But also on top of that, fine guards whose careers were destroyed, and the contagion that happened across the force, the level of convictions in many areas went down. The way in which roads policing in particular was conducted in the Midwest for a significant period of time, the number of summonses went down. The morale in the force, and I know this very, very thoroughly because where I live, many Gardaí are from North Tipperary because of the geographical location and not being able to serve in your own locality. So Limerick is very clear. The morale collapsed. The morale is significantly still damaged. And there's a whole range of other issues and other cases coming down the road as well. So, if the Taoiseach of Ireland believes that this should be looked into, as he responded to Deputy Crowe, and I welcome that. I was happy to hear that. But very soon after, the Minister of Justice said no. I believe that the Minister of Justice knows there's an issue here. I believe that he knows it. I've spoken to him, but I just don't understand why he can't give some indication that he's considering this. Because ultimately, I believe this is going to have to happen one way or the other, whether it's Jim O'Callaghan or somebody else.
And I'll just let Cathal respond to that for a moment, because it has been well documented over the last couple of years as well, particularly from the Garda Representative Association, that on many occasions Garda morale is on the floor, and that's by and large for when it comes to disciplinary issues, that they might be afraid even to take action when they're out in the beat for fear of the repercussions. So Cathal, and as we heard from Jim O'Callaghan there, as we've heard from Alan's comments and even past reports, there seems to be a difference of opinion between the Taoiseach and the Justice Minister here over whether we have an inquiry or not. But how do we get anybody that we're trying to entice into An Garda Síochána, or anybody that's in it, to stay in the force if they can't trust the Justice Minister to have their back when something like this happens?
Yeah, well, I think Minister O'Callaghan absolutely has the back of An Garda Síochána, and I've always sensed that, and he's been quite outspoken before he became Minister, and since he's followed through with action. But just for clarity and for clearing this up a little bit, there's a number of cases that are tangential to this. They're kind of spin-off cases from this big one that caught the headlines. Those cases still need to happen. Now, I would have a certain view on what should happen with them. I can't express that because they're before the courts. I think that has to conclude, whether there's to be convictions or whether to be struck out or whatever. I think that has to conclude, and then you can only begin to... So I would anticipate that something will happen here, but I think there's a process to how that has to happen. I've been pushing for an inquiry, but I think those cases have to conclude in one way or another before that happens. Could I just mention that over the weekend, it's rare enough I get a chance to go through old files and things, but I actually went through some of my filing cabinet the weekend, and there's some files I shredded, and others, if they're old historic ones, I no longer need. Within those files, I found a letter, and I've actually published it on my social media over the weekend. This was from 3 years ago. I want to stress now, it's nothing related to what we're talking about in the Midwest. It was a guard elsewhere in the country, but it was a note I read out in the Dáil with their consent. I don't know was it a man or a woman, but they consented to it being read out, and it basically said that they were one of the 108 at the time, that things had become so miserable for them professionally and in family life because of the strain of this investigation and suspension, that they actually saw no other way out but to take their lives. So that was one of the 108 in the country 3 years ago. This has been devastating. And I think there needs to be an analysis. I've heard people who've studied this case closely, for the one in the Midwest now I'm back to referring to, and there will be question marks over how some of the evidence was gathered, how it was introduced, and it's not for myself or Alan to adjudicate on that, but an inquiry should in due course. But I stress again, I do think the tangential court cases, the trials are to happen. I think they need to conclude, and only then can you have a fair review of all of this. You can cast a cold eye over everything. But
Cathal, in fairness, for the 5 Gardaí that were involved in this case, I don't think they want to be hauled over the coals anymore. I think they want to see action as soon as possible. Wouldn't it be fair to them if this inquiry got on straight away, regardless of the other cases going on? Because realistically, cases will be judged on their own merits, and those cases have to be treated as separate to this one for due process to take its shape.
Yeah, I have a very strong view on all of this, and I'm very much on the side of guards. But I would say, and anyone who's, I'm not legally trained, but if, like Alan, you'd pick up a bit of legal knowledge when you're a TD and having to deal with legislation, I would say, and I'd be of the opinion, I'm sure Alan would be too, that some of these trials would have to clear one way or another for this to happen, because there's a lot of linked evidence, there's a lot of linked stuff here. We have 5 people rightly acquitted, and I want to say that strongly here because I've been in their corner for a long time, Alan has too, but I mean, their careers have just been destroyed, and some of them have retired, and some will never progress their careers because of what has happened here, and I think that needs to be looked at. But I don't see how it can process-wise be looked at until those other cases have been cleared from the court system.
A quick final word to Deputy Alan Kelly. Alan, would you like to see this review get underway straight away, or do you agree with Deputy Crowe? Does it have to wait for maybe some of those interconnecting cases to take their course?
Well, look, there are other cases we all know about. I'd be of a view of where they should go, given the precedent set by the trial where the 5 were found to be completely innocent. One of the quickest decisions ever taken in a court, given the volume of charges against them. But there's no reason in the wild earthly world why a Minister for Justice can't say, we have a number of interconnected issues here, trials. I am going to have an inquiry. This is going to be looked into, but we just need for those to conclude. Even if he said that, even if the government committed to that, I think a lot of people would take that at face value. But he's not doing that. I believe he knows there's an issue here. But from all my interactions, and I have quite an amount of interactions with him, given that I'm a spokesperson, I talk to him privately, I talk to him publicly. I don't believe in the wild earthly world at this moment in time that the Department of Justice or Jim O'Callaghan are going to have an inquiry. So if he would come out and say, look, we know there are other issues here that just need to be concluded before the courts, and once that is done, I'm telling you now, I'm indicating now in advance that an inquiry will happen. But I don't believe he's going to do that. I wish he would. I'd encourage Deputy Crowe to get on to his party colleagues to ensure that this happens. But until I hear him actually say it, I won't believe that it is, because I believe that the Department of Justice will run a mile from this. I've dealt with the Department of Justice for close to 20 years, and I know how they work, and they will certainly not be encouraging a minister to go down this road.
Well,
so
the Department of Justice isn't here to defend itself, but we will have to wait and see how this all plays out.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately here, the bottom line is this. There are people listening to your show who are affected by this. There are people across a whole range of the Midwest who are affected by this in many different ways. This was an absolute scandal. It is, I said inside the Dáil, it stinks. And really, ultimately, we have to see an inquiry. And if Jim O'Callaghan doesn't do it, I believe some Minister for Justice in the future will have to do it.
We'll have to see how these events play out, that is for sure, but certainly we have not heard the last of this story. My thanks to Meelick Fianna Fáil TD, Cathal, Crowe, and Labour TD and Labour spokesperson for Justice Alan Kelly. Thank you very much for coming on to discuss this on the show this morning.